On Monday, Pope Francis is going to Stockholm at the invitation of the Lutheran community in Stockholm. He's going to pray with them to begin a year of celebration of the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. So times they are changing. So we welcome Senator Luther among us. It's also a bit strange that someone named Brian Smith should be introducing Senator Olsen, because his opponent is also named Brian Smith, the mayor of Wabaka, who was here about 3 weeks ago, and I had to introduce him as my long-lost cousin. And in fact, I explained to Senator Olsen that some people have sent me contributions because they think that I'm wrong. And I guess as a religion professor, I had to give the money back. So I did.
What kind of professor wouldn't?
Well, we better let that one go, Senator. For the 2015-2016 legislative session, Senator Olsen served as the vice chair of the Joint Committee on Finance, the chair of the Education Committee, the vice chair of the Insurance, Housing, and Trade Committee, and a member of the Natural Resources Committee in the State Senate. Previously, he had served in the Assembly for 10 years before he became a state senator in 2004. Senator Olsen also serves on the Executive Committee and Steering Committee for the Education Commission of the States, ECS. And previously, he served as vice chair of ECS, and formerly served as the co-chair of the Education Committee for the National Conference of State Legislatures. In addition, he has been a member of the Governor's Council on Financial Literacy, Read to Lead Development Council, Wisconsin Education Communication Board, the Wisconsin Agriculture, Education, and Workforce Development Council, the State Capital and Executive Residence Board, and also a member of the Wisconsin Claims Board. In addition, he is a board member of the University of Wisconsin Hospital and Clinics Authority and serves on the Finance and Audit and Executive Committee for that organization. Senator Olsen is a graduate of Berlin High School and received his Bachelor in Science degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's a past member of the Berlin School Board, where he served as president of the board for 9 years. He's probably very well known, particularly in this area, for his leadership in getting the graduated driver's license legislation authored, a law that's aimed at improving the way teenagers learn to drive. That incident in November of 1997, which we remember well, Chris Greening, a high school student in Ripon, was killed in a tragic automobile crash, and another teenager was driving who had just a permit. And citizens, along with Senator Olsen, was able to get through the legislature a law requiring more graduated experience with adults in the car from periods of time to train teenagers. I had to give the eulogy at that funeral, and it was tragic. So we thank you for the leadership that you've taken since then. Senator Olsen tonight is going to address issues of higher education, transportation, and the state budget. So we welcome back to Ripon College and to the Center for the Politics of the People, Senator Luther Olsen.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. As you heard, my name is Luther Olsen, State Senator. But after looking at all the signs in town, I think I should change my name to Underdog, because Underdog's got all kinds of signs all over, and it says on the bottom, you've got God's vote at RCC. I thought, well, if you've got God's vote, who else do you need, really? So, but I guess I'm not going to change my name. I was going to go through the list of stuff that I have been involved in Madison, but Brian did a really good job of that. I've had all kinds of opportunities to represent the 14th Senate District on lots of different committees and boards at the state level and the national level, and I think it does a couple different things. I think one of the things it does is it gives me an ability to represent the people of the 14th Senate District in areas that most people really don't think about. Just for example, on the claims board, there's 5 of us that sit on the claims board, and the claims board is a board that if a person in the state goes to an agency with a claim and they deny it, they come to us as a claims board, and there's only 5 of us, and we do all the reading and get all the background, and sometimes they come and talk to us, and then we have to decide if we should pay the claim or not pay the claim. And it's really interesting because some of them are pretty heart-wrenching things, but we have laws to follow and we don't, in fact, we very seldom pay them out. But on the claims board, our biggest claim I think was $65 million, and our smallest one was probably less than $10, and I don't know how many hundreds of dollars the state goes through, but the small ones are inmates in our state prisons who are upset that something got lost of theirs or something got stolen or things like that. So I'm not going to go into all those different organizations, but it really, I think being on those committees and on those boards really helps me to be a better senator because you get all kinds of experiences and see different things that you just normally would not do. For example, on the hospital board, and it's a $3 billion operation, and you really get to understand and see firsthand what running a hospital is like, making the big decisions, with MA and insurance and healthcare and employees and all those things. I live in Ripon with my wife, Joan Wade. We love this community. As Brian said, I was on the Berlin School Board for 21 years. I also served on the Waushara County Fair Board for 6 years and been active in our church. So we'll just skip right over that stuff. And let's get into the issues that I see that the state is facing. And of course, in the legislature, the only bill that has to pass is a state budget. The governor gets the recommendations from state agencies, then he distills those and sends them to the legislature. And I've been lucky enough every budget since I've been on the Senate to be on joint finance, and we then have hearings around the state and spend months and months looking at every line of that budget and making all kinds of votes. And it really, like I said, it's the only bill that really has to pass, and we have to make tough decisions because it would be nice to spend money on all these causes, and when it's budget time in my office, we have people coming in every half an hour to say, and nobody ever says, oh, we got enough money, don't give us any more. They just say, we really need more money. But the big issues, I think, in this next budget is K-12 funding and university system funding. Every budget that the governor has put forth, he has frozen or cut money to the K-12 system, and I've been fortunate enough in the being on joint finance to really work and push to not cut since up to 2010 when we didn't have the money, but to increase the money for K-12 education in our state. In this last budget, we increased it $200 million more than the governor put forth. And that is really difficult because when we get a budget from him, the money's all spent. So you have to figure out how do you work things to generate more money. And we have one of the best school systems in the state. There was a study that just came out a little while ago, and they ranked our school system, our state system, number 5 in the country, which was really interesting and something we can be proud of. UW, another area, and one of the things I learned about funding for the higher ed, public higher ed in the state, and I learned this when I was in the assembly a number of years ago. I was at a conference, and they said, the four-year state institutions are the balance thing for the budget. When the economy is down, they wind up cutting money to the system. When the budget is up and the economy is up, it gets more money. And that happens in every state. And this last budget, as you know, the governor cut university system $300 million. We were able to only cut it $250, which to me, I wish we wouldn't have had to cut it at all. We've we've frozen tuition for a few years. The board of regents and President Cross said that they can handle one more tuition freeze, but they need some modest increase in funding, and I'm hoping that we can do that. The biggest driver of our budget, though, is medical assistance, MA, and that's a program for people who are of low income, helping them with their medical care. And one of the things that's sort of distressing to me is we have more and more kids on free and reduced lunch than we've ever had before. In other words, our population is unfortunately getting poorer, and so we have more people that need public assistance for their health care. And so that has been the area of the budget that has grown faster than anything else. And one of the ways I think that we can work on that, to slow that down a little bit, is hopefully prevention, because we're really, really good at spending money to try to cure people, and some things you just can't cure. But the other problem with MA is it never pays, being on the hospital board, anybody that's on the board here in Ripon knows this, that in some months our census is up, but our income is down because our payer mix leans heavier to medical assistance, and government does not pay nearly the full cost. In fact, sometimes it barely pays the cost, and so we wind up having to shift that to the third-party payers, or in other words, the people who have insurance. They wind up having to pay more than they should to make up for those folks. But that is one of our big cost drivers. We think that we've got that a little bit under control so far. A lot of budgets, we budget a certain amount of money, and it's never enough. This budget, it looks like that we're in right now, looks like that we will not have to spend everything we set aside. Another issue that is a hot topic is the transportation fund. We tax gas per gallon, not a percent like we do sales and income taxes. And so our biggest revenue source is gas tax or diesel tax, user fee, I consider it, and license fees and registration. And a number of years ago, there was a push, and we did it, and I think the people who really pushed it hard probably regret it now, but we got rid of indexing, and we would have had probably $1 billion more in the transportation fund if we wouldn't have gotten rid of indexing. My hope is no matter what happens in this budget for transportation, we go back to indexing. But what has happened with our revenue, our gas tax especially, is, and it's usually about $32 million increase a year. But as you know, cars and trucks are more efficient, so you get more gas mileage or miles per gallon than we have ever gotten before. I was over at Brakebush a while ago, and they have a big fleet of trucks. And I asked them, I said, you've got those skirts under the trailers, you've seen those, that they sort of go down and for wind resistance. I said, what difference is that making for you? And he said, we get about, I think it's 3/4 of a mile more per gallon, which doesn't seem much, but if you put on lots and lots of miles, that is less fuel they have to buy, and then we get less revenue. So I think that it's going to be a challenge because there's a number of people, the governor included, who doesn't want to raise gas tax, which I think is a user fee. The question that I have, and I'll be talking to my colleagues when we get back to Madison if I'm fortunate enough to get reelected, is, okay, if we're not going to raise the gas tax this budget, when are we? And when would be a better time than right now? Because, I read the other day gas is going to be less than $2 hopefully. And so we have to take care of our roads. I talked to folks that are saying, it'll be, in some townships and counties, it'll be 200 years before, at the rate we're going, they get to fix up the last road in their county. And one of the things that's interesting about our roads is we're probably we are the state that has the most blacktop roads in the country. And we were talking about that, and the guys who really know about that said, the reason we have more blacktop roads than any other state is we used to have a lot of small dairy farms. And if you know, back years ago, the milk truck would come every day or every other day, and they'd need to get down these roads, and you couldn't really rely on gravel roads or dirt roads to get these trucks through. So we blacktopped just about everything compared to, you go to some other states and look off the road and you can see a cloud of dust, or you see a truck or something going down a gravel road. So, they're not cheap, but it's not cheap also to maintain our roads if we let them go too far. Probably the thing that nobody is really talking about, that I have the biggest concern that in our state, an issue that is out there, and it's maybe below the radar screen, I think it's probably coming on the top of on the radar screen, now is I believe we have a serious worker shortage. For years we were saying, well, we need more jobs, which we always need more good paying jobs, but if you look at the worker shortage we have in our state, and I'm talking about entry-level jobs to high-skilled jobs, we have a shortage. Every business you go by almost has a help wanted sign out there. And I represent Wisconsin Dells. They can't get people hired to clean the rooms. Green Lake, we've got Heidel House. They can't find servers or people to clean the rooms. And these are just beginning jobs. They're not high-skilled jobs. Then you talk to people who have high-skilled jobs. I was talking to a lady the other day that has a machine shop, and she says, I spend 2 hours every morning trying to find 3 new people to come and work for my business. I was talking to a guy today, and he said, I just hired somebody installer. He installs underground gas tanks. He said, I started him out at $40 an hour. And he said, I had to pay that or I could not get anybody to come to work for me. And so if we're going to have an economy that grows, but businesses cannot find workers, and look at Speed Green or Ripon Printers, there's an ad in the paper every week that they need employees. And so we have to figure out, what can the state do about that? I think we have to make sure that everyone who wants a job gets a job, but more importantly, sometimes figure out why people don't want jobs. I mentioned this the other day at a Marquette County Towns meeting, and people jumped me afterwards saying, listen, there's people out there that they just don't want to work because they got it figured out that they don't have to. And so we have to make sure that the government is not, and I know this is Representative or Congressman Grothman's big thing, we have to make sure that there's not incentives for folks not to work because our economy needs that. One of the other areas that I think are an issue that we'll be working on next time is our high-capacity wells in our state. We have areas of the state that are pumping water out of the ground to feed us, and especially in the Central Sands, that are using that water to grow food for us. At the same time, we've got lakes, seepage lakes. In other words, a seepage lake is a lake that there's no river coming in, no river going out. It just fills up because the ground seeps into the lake, that are getting low and lower. And we have to figure out the science on why is that happening. We've done some good research on rivers, but we haven't done anything on lakes. And it's sort of interesting because this isn't a new phenomenon. There was a lake over on the other side of Washare County. It drained out, and they found in the middle of the lake a hay rake. So apparently it has been, low before because they used to take hay off that. So we have to figure out how we can make sure that we have enough water, which is what the West has had fights with for years, for growing food. At the same time, if you own a house on that lake and it dries up and all you got is a little marsh out there or just tall grass, the value goes down, and that isn't really fair either. So we've got to work on those things. So I think we want to open it up for questions, I think, and I'm happy to entertain questions. And I know that reading in the paper, Tim is the master questioner.
Thank you. It's been very wonderful to cooperate with the Ripon Commonwealth Press at each of these forums. They are co-sponsored by the press and by the Center for Politics and the People. And the publisher of Ripon Commonwealth Press, Tim Like, always comes with some very thoughtful questions to start the discussion. So Tim, would you start us off with some good discussion?
I don't know if it'll be good, but to your comment about the labor shortage, Luther, we had the Center for Politics and the People had a session Monday on immigration and discussing comprehensive immigration reform. The issue came up of if we were to have some sort of reform, how would labor considerations, particularly entry level, play a part in that? But just mentioning that. You mentioned the budget, and the governor, as you said, did not plan to have any additional funding for K-12 education, and really at your insistence, that was up to $200 million. And that's about the amount, actually, it's $245 million for voucher schools in the state. Can you defend a two-track system of education where you have your traditional public school and you have voucher schools that some say aren't accountable and aren't as effective, and actually subsidize people who are otherwise paying for private schools? Why does a state that has a single university system or correction system, a highway system, need a two-track public education system?
A great question. This whole program started in Milwaukee. Years ago, MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools, was really a great school system. But over the years, it wasn't really turning out students, not graduating students. And Howard Fuller at that time, a good friend of mine, was superintendent, and he called some of his schools dropout factories. And so if you had any money, you wound up moving out of Milwaukee or sending your students to a private school. And the business community down there said, we cannot continue to thrive in this part of the state if we don't have kids who are graduating from high school. And so they had sort of lost patience with MPS, and really probably the mother of the choice program was a African-American Democrat in the Assembly, Polly Williams, who really pushed that. And it started originally with poor kids, a small number, 185% of poverty, and you could go to a choice school. Well, like any good program or any program in government, they all grow and they get more expensive. And there has been over time, as you mentioned, it's now statewide. And I have said for a number of years, we can't afford two systems. But what's interesting, I thought about this a little bit more, because we have about 100,000 kids in private school right now. And some of those private schools are financially stressed. And so what we have done is we expanded statewide, and if you're 185% of poverty, you can go and we give you some money. The thing that we have to be careful about is that cheaper to fund, these poor kids going to these schools and helping the schools out, or having them close, and they all come back to the public school system, which would cost us about $1 billion, probably $1.1 billion a year, and just to educate them. Plus, I don't know how many school districts, especially if you have a large number of private school kids, have enough room in their buildings, and so they would have to build new buildings and expand and things like this. So the question is, what do we do for poor kids who don't have a choice Should we help them out because we need them to graduate? Do we have enough money to do this? And probably more importantly, if those private schools close and those 100,000 kids wind up in the public school system, it will cost us lots and lots of money to do that. You talked about the accountability though. Let me just talk about that a second. One of the things we did in the last couple budgets is we said that if you're going to a private school and get voucher money, you have to take the state test. And you have to have a school report card like the publics do for those kids. Now, it's sort of interesting. Let's say that you're running a private school and you have 100 kids and you have 10 that are choice, and they got to take the test, and you get a report card on those 10 kids, and they're all poor and they're coming to school probably a little behind, and so your report card probably isn't as good as it would be for the whole school. So you have to determine, do we want to test all of our kids and have a report card for our whole school, or just these 10 kids that probably doesn't make our school look that great? So that's, as I look at this, and the other thing is, and I've said this the other night, years ago, if you sent your kid to a private school, you said, you know what, I am going to pay for that, my child's education. I'm still going to pay my taxes, but I'll spend the extra money because I want the religious training or whatever. It seems like that parents of today and the ones that I listen to in joint finance come and testify, say, you know what, I'm paying taxes. I would like some of my tax money and other people's tax money to follow my child no matter where they go. And so it's some people call it a check in every backpack, some people call it follow the child. And it seems like our society is changing from it's my responsibility because I want to send my child someplace else, I'll still pay my taxes and pay it, to, you know what, the money should pay for my child's education no matter where they go.
Thank you. As you know, there's kind of a strain of anti-establishmentism in the country right now, the sense that the system is rigged, the power brokers are all in the take, and there's a distrust in the federal level. I don't know if that's carried down at the state level, but if it hasn't, it may. A question for you as a member of the Republican Party, but you could be the other party as well, Democrat. Why not pass some good government measures? And you've been in the legislature for 22 years, which I couldn't believe it's been that long.
Neither can I.
Yeah, I bet.
Because I'm only 42.
Luckily, nobody lies. Why not have the Republicans take the lead and say, we are going to open up our caucus to the public because we're doing public business in a public place on the public dime. So let the public see how we set our agenda, our legislative agenda. Or why not have the Republican Party take the lead and say, we will have fair redistricting, even though it's always been the party in power every 10 years that decides how districts will be set. But why not say we will have a nonpartisan or a bipartisan panel do it and get it away from the politics? That is to say, best defense is a good offense. Why not become the good government party? And thirdly and finally, why not suggest that through law or through a state government, a state constitution referendum, to have the open meetings law apply to the legislature as it does for lower levels of government? So it's largely a good government question.
Yeah, why don't you ask me something simple, Tim? Well, I think the first question and the last one are sort of the same. We do have closed caucuses because we are a partisan body. It's sort of like when I was on the school board or the hospital board, we go in closed session because we are going to negotiate or deal with some, on buying something or doing something or dealing with personnel issues. We, in Madison, at the legislature, are a partisan body. And so when we go to the floor, in fact, most of the bills we pass are bipartisan. Republicans sign on, Democrats sign on, and I think 90-some% of the bills are bipartisan that get signed by the governor. There's just a few that aren't. But when you're in caucus, you figure out strategy because it's sort of like two sides. I wish politics wasn't that way, but it's two sides. It's them against us. And when I was in the minority, it was the same way. It was them against us on certain issues. And so you sit there and figure out strategies on how are we going to handle this when we get to the floor, who's going to talk, what kind of amendments are we going to do. So we just, both sides go into close caucus to figure out what is their strategy for the floor. It's not, I was on the school board for 21 years in Burlington. We never did that except when we went to closed session and then you could only talk about certain things and you read the statute and then had a voice vote and the whole 9 yards. Partisan politics is different than that.
But the question, why not take, I know it's different and that's how it is,
Yeah.
but why not the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, somebody take the lead and say, it's not gonna be business as usual.
Right.
We are going to do our strategizing and our agenda setting, as naive as it sounds, we're gonna do it in public because it's the public's business. Why not?
Well, we do the debating and the voting and all that stuff
Sure.
when we get to the floor. Everything in the committee and on the floor is. But honestly, Tim, probably what would happen. Let's say we did this. What would happen is legislators would get together in somebody's office and do it anyway. I mean, in reality, it's nice to say, oh, we do it in public, but it won't happen. It will, because it's the business is done on the floor, the strategy is done in closed caucus. How are you going to do your business? But all the votes, all the discussion is out in public, and this stuff is just backroom things. So that, that's sort of where it's at. As far as redistricting, it's sort of interesting because I think it's been since 1980 that one party set the districts for election. It's usually been done in the courts. Each party would put their map forth, and it would either get vetoed by the governor or whatever, and then the courts would come up with the map. So we really have in Wisconsin for most of the years, in fact, very, very seldom does one party set the maps. Otherwise, it's done in the courts. The courts take both maps and figure out which is the fair thing to do. And there are certain laws that you have to follow to come up with a map, because every map winds up in court anyways. And so you just can't say, well, I'm going to do my own map, and then that's the way it is, because the other party sues, takes you to court, and the court has the final say on your map, even though one party comes up with a map. In fact, this last map that we did, the court said, we're going to make you change some boundary lines in Milwaukee because you didn't follow the law. So when you look at the redistricting maps that we do in Wisconsin, when one party does it, or the ones that become law, there's specific laws that determine what those boundaries are and what the makeup of those districts are, and we make sure that passes muster. Now, sometimes the judge may interpret it a little different, but mostly not. So at the end of the day, no party has the final say in what the maps are in our state. It always is, the final say is the court system. And we hope believe that they're nonpartisan.
Thank you, Tim. Now let's open it up to you folks. If you would just give me your question, I'll repeat it for the sound system, and that will give the senator maybe 30 seconds or so to think a little bit. So let's start with this gentleman right here.
Yeah, Luther, I was very impressed with how artfully you answered his first question, but I don't think you answered the question. Personally, I don't think that without the voucher system, all the private schools are going to close. And he asked you, do you think that we should support a two-track education system? And I didn't hear that answered. I heard a lot of variables and stuff, but that's kind of what's happening.
So the question is, why the two-track system and why continue it?
Sure. I'll give you probably the down and dirty answer to that is when Governor Walker ran for re-election this last time, he ran on two issues. One, reducing property taxes, and the second one, expanding school choice. And he got elected. So a majority of the people said, we want our taxes low and we want to expand school choice. So that's really sort of what happened. If he would have lost, trust me, school choice wouldn't have been expanded, but he won, and so that was on his agenda, and that's what's happened.
Another question?
Yes, it has to do with the voucher program again. And as I understand it, lots of people who are now applying for the vouchers have already been in private schools. These are not new students to the voucher system. And I do not understand why someone who's already paying tuition for their student to go to private school now has the option to do vouchers. And I see parochial schools applying or recommending that their people do this. And then I also believe that people who send their kids to private schools get some type of tax credit for doing so. And I believe that is accurate also. And then I'd like to know where this $245 million that was put back into education went. How much of it actually went to educating students? As I understand it, most of it went to property tax relief. Those are my questions.
Three questions. Why should people who are already in private school get vouchers since they're already paying for private education? Why should they get tax credits as well? And what happened to the $245 million that went back to education? Did it really go for the reduction of property taxes rather than to the schools and the classrooms?
Yeah, thank you. Great questions. Do the first one again. I was thinking of the first one was, why do kids who are in school? Because the requirement is you have to be below 185% of poverty. It's a poverty factor that determines if you get the money. So if you're already going to a choice school, how do we say to you as a parent saying, I'm sorry, these people in the public schools, we're going to let them into your school, and they're at 185% of poverty, but you're going to have to pay your way. What will happen is they'll pull their kids out, send them to the public school for a year or whatever, and then pull them back to the private school so that they get the vouchers. So it's a system based on poverty. The big question is I think people have to figure out and ask what's going to happen in the future. Is the 150% of poverty still going to be there, or is that number going to raise like it did in Milwaukee to 300% of poverty? I think that's the question. Second one.
Tax credits?
Oh, tax credit. You're correct. There is, if you spend up to $10,000 of for tuition, it's not a credit. It's a tax deduction. So you don't. Let's say you spend $10,000. Your taxes are lowered by $750, or if you're at the high level. So we have that because we sort of want to make sure that all those kids don't come back to the public schools. As much as we have great public schools, with that many kids coming back, it would really cost us an awful lot of money, and Ripon would be building another building again. So, and the last question?
The last question is, where did that $245 million go?
Some of it was equalized aid, but a lot of it was categorical aid. And categorical aid is aid that goes directly to the school. Sometimes, the big question is when you're funding schools is you can give money, but if your revenue limit doesn't increase, you can't spend it. Right? I mean, so.
That's right.
Right, and so, but the categorical aids are outside the revenue limit, so schools get that money. And I know the governor said in this next, but the problem is when you do categorical aids, it's not equalizing. So the wealthy district gets the same amount of money per student as the district that is poor, and when I say poor, that means that they don't have much property wealth per student. And so a lot of times we do it 50-50. The thing that makes me a little nervous about continuing to put money in the categorical aid is it makes our funding formula less equal, and so we could set ourselves up for a Supreme Court case that we lose because we put too much money in there so that we make sure that every school gets the same amount of money. I mean, Sue's on the Green Lake board and you don't get any money.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
right.
at all.
So category
Yeah,
aid is very important.
it's important to them, but we have schools that get very, very little aid. It's all raised locally, and we have districts that get 85% of what they spend from the state, because they're, and Boyd is one of them, that they have very small amount of property wealth per student.
Could I follow up on that? Am I correct in assuming, from what you've told us tonight about the private system and the public system, that there's been a tremendous increase over the years of low-income people residing in Wisconsin, and that if the public school had to absorb all of them, it would be more expensive than to use some of the existing private school facilities to educate them?
Well, what's going on is there's a lot of school districts that had 10, 20, 30% free and reduced lunches. Now we've got schools that are 70% free and reduced lunches. And so, but I think what is happening is as our per capita income has not grown, and so if a parent wants to send their child to a private school, maybe they can't afford it anymore. And then they'll say, I'm sorry, we just can't afford it anymore. We're gonna send our kid to the public schools. And if we have that happen, then we will all pay a lot more. For example, the difference in a choice student, we spend $7,200 or $7,800 depending on what grades they're in. On average, we spend $12,000 for public, but it's really only about $10,000 of property taxes and state aid. The rest of it is federal funds and things like this. So rather than helping some of those school districts to the tune of $7,200, we would be spending $12,000.
So it's cheaper, and is that what you're basically saying? The bottom line, it's cheaper, the current system, that if we were to change it and put it back all in the public system, it would be much more expensive for the state?
Yeah, because we have right now about 830,000 kids in the public school system. If you were to add another 100,000 to that, we would have to, because we pay per child, we would have to raise that kind of money, and then we would also have to have a place to house them. So we are fortunate because private schools do a good job. I mean, and especially
Ripon College.
Ripon College, yeah, private nonprofit school does a great job. One of the problems that we have is, once this started in Milwaukee, there's some great private schools, but there's also some fly-by-night folks who got in there, took the money, and you read the papers, they fled the state, they didn't pay their teachers, and then those kids really got the short end of the stick. Are private schools that much better in Milwaukee than the public? Depends on the school. But if you look at the test, not that great, because when you're dealing with educating kids in poverty, there is no silver bullet. We're all looking for silver bullets, saying, oh, what's going to be the answer here? There is no silver bullets, although I was on this group out of NCSL that, as I mentioned to you, I guess, traveled the country or the world looking at what other countries do, and we just wrote a paper called No Time to Lose, and there are four things really that other countries do that Wisconsin doesn't, and we really need to look at those at the state level.
Thank you. More questions? Yes, student.
On your website, you say that you'd like to reduce excessive amounts of bureaucratic red tape, which sounds great. I think that's what everybody wants. But what is a specific area or example in the Wisconsin state government where you would like to reduce bureaucratic red tape?
Sure, I'll just
Quick question for the.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
That you on your website propose that you'd like to reduce excessive red tape and bureaucracy in the state of Wisconsin. The gentleman is asking, can you give a specific example where you think that could be done?
Sure, I just talked to a gentleman today that I mentioned before. He puts in gas tanks at gas stations, and he was telling me how much paperwork and how hard it is in Wisconsin to either clean up a bad one through PECFA or put a new one in. He said, some of these things take 2 years to get done, which is ridiculous. If we know what's going on, we should be able to do that. For when we build roads, a big percent of the cost of a road is the work that you have to do before you even start moving any dirt. All the studies and all those things, and sure, you want to do it right. You want to make sure that it'll last and the whole 9 yards. But a lot of times there's overkill in this, and even the people who build roads think, guys, we were really wasting money and time because of all the paperwork and the study after study after study that you have to do. So I think if you talk to anybody in business, they will tell you, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, that the bureaucracy that they're having to do just to survive is making it very difficult for them to be there.
Follow up on that, or another issue you'd like to discuss with the senator? This is your chance. He's here. Barry.
I didn't come here to speak, but if nobody else is going to, I'm not here to attack you.
Well, thank you.
That's a loaded start. Look out. Here comes the curveball, Luther.
Well, all right. I received 2 flyers in the mail this summer, unsolicited by me that I remember. One was, I believe it was from the state of Wisconsin, wanting people to come and work for the prison system. And they listed their pay per hour, and then it said you had opportunities for overtime, which I took meant that you were going to be required to work overtime. And then a couple of weeks later, I got another flyer in the mail from John Deere Horicon Works, wanting people to come and work there because they're expanding their plant there and so forth. And I understand they're not in your district. But their starting pay per hour was quite a bit more than what the prison flyer one was. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, my gosh, do I want to go and work in a prison for less money than I can work somewhere else? How is the state going to deal with that? And I don't want to be in your position because I don't know how you would do it.
So the question is, there is a differential pay scale considerable between state jobs like working in the state prison where they need workers and working for a private company like John Deere. So how is the state going to compete for labor with that differential in pay?
Great question, Gary. In fact, if you're a personal care worker, everybody know what those are. They're people that go into people's houses and help them so they can stay at home, don't have to go to assisted living or something like that. We pay about $9.25 per hour. You can go to Quick Trip and make $10.25 and have benefits and not have to do some of the work that you have to do for a personal care worker. We're gonna have to raise, well, the wages for those folks, I'm guessing $2 to $3 an hour, just to get them, because I talked to some of the, Care Wisconsin, and I said, so are you able to find people? And they said, Luther, we have trouble finding people. In fact, she said, just a couple of days ago, we couldn't find anybody to come and take care of this person on the weekend. We had to put them in assisted living, so it's gonna cost us more money. To do that, to raise the wages of those folks, $3 an hour is gonna cost us, in the Fed's share, this about $400 million a year. So, if we wind up and not being able to hire people, in fact, in the prison system, Secretary Litcher just raised the wages, I think 75 cents an hour to help to get people there. We're gonna wind up paying more taxes because we're gonna have to pay people who work at the state more money. We have for many years frozen salaries, frozen things, and you can only do that so long, and you can only do it when there is an abundance of workers. But when there's a worker shortage, you have to pay. In fact, looking at the, just in the Ripon paper, Speed Queen or Alliance and Ripon printers, I think just off the top of my head, since last spring to now, I think they've raised their starting salary $2 an hour to get people. And I think you're right, and it will cost us more to hire people to work for the government. It used to be government was a great place to go and work, but now as other businesses are getting folks and they're paying more, it's becoming a serious challenge.
We have time for another question or two, one more?
Unless someone else has a question.
Anyone else who hasn't asked a question yet want to ask?
I don't wanna,
Oh, go ahead.
You may have the last question.
how are we going to address poverty in the state of Wisconsin? It is really shameful that we have all of these kids on free and reduced lunches. And, how about paying people a living wage? I know that's been a hot topic too, but I think that somehow the issue of poverty has to be addressed. So I'd like to hear.
So with the growing amount of poverty, which you referred to in your talk, how are we going to address this? Is something like offering a living wage to people going to be able to help them significantly? How can we address this as a state?
I remember when I was in the assembly going to Grace Lutheran Church in Berlin at that time, talking to AAUW women about what I saw was happening in our country in the future. And on the way home, I thought, God, Luther, that was such a downer. Why did you have to say that to these women? But what I was telling them is we have become a world economy. And our salaries are here, and the rest of the world's are here. They're not coming here, they're coming here, but I'm afraid over time we are going down. One of the reasons we have lower incomes is because of people say, okay, we gotta work so many hours. If we keep you under this number of hours, we don't have to provide health insurance. You can get, Obamacare, things like that. And we are in a world economy with competition. So you really asked me, what about raising the minimum wage? Okay, let's just be real blunt about it. So let's say that we raise the minimum wage to, instead of what it is now, and I don't know, there's hardly anybody that pays minimum wage, but let's say we just went to $12 an hour. And I'm working at some place that pays $12 an hour, and I've been there a few years. Now somebody walks in the door who knows nothing about the job is making $12 an hour. Am I going to be happy with $12 an hour, or am I going to say, well, you just gave them $3-4 raise, I want $3-4 raise, and then all of a sudden everybody gets that, and then the cost of the products go up, and the people of the bottom rung are still at the bottom of the rung. It's just that they're having to deal with more money, and so I think, and as I look at it, supply and demand is going to raise wages. was talking to my daughter who works in marketing at one of the big resorts in the Dells, and they're about 200 workers short out of 1,000. And she said, Dad, I think the company's gonna have to raise wages on those folks that clean rooms because we cannot afford to not have our rooms clean and get people in at a decent hour. So it will happen, I believe, as much as companies can afford to do it. Because when you have a shortage of labor, then wages go up because everybody's competing for people to get employees.
Thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom tonight. Will you stay around for a few minutes in case?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, well, there's another forum that's beginning next door with 3 judges of Wisconsin talking about, does humanity affect how a judge imposes penalties? That might be an interesting panel. But the senator will stay for a few minutes. I want to thank him very much. I want to thank Ripon Commonwealth Press for coming to every one of these forums and answering very good questions, asking good questions, giving good publicity in the press. I want to thank all of you for coming. This is our last candidate who's agreed to come. And thank you. Many of you have come for several of these, and it's been very informative, and your questions have been really excellent. So we want to thank you. Next Tuesday night will be the next event of the Center for Politics and the People. It will be at 6:30 in this room. A professor of mathematics from the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, Steve Slidnick, is going to be here to talk about the Electoral College and how a mathematician looks at the Electoral College and how its votes are decided. So that will be at 6:30 next week. And then a week from tonight in this room at 4:15, the students of Ripon College, representing Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, will put on a debate in this room on some of the issues that are facing us in the election. So we hope that you can come back next week for 2 very interesting panels. Thank you all very much for coming.